Welcome to episode number 35 of the Pernicious Chattel channel. I'm returning to, for the fourth time, Erich Fromm and the book, The Sane Society. After spending 3 weeks immersed in these compelling ideas, I've suddenly found myself staring around with what I can only describe as Fromm's eyes. And I just don't like what I see. Fromm, your stereotypical German psychoanalyst, maintained a carefully curated distance from the world, one that left no commonly accepted assumptions unsmashed. What makes Fromm quintessentially different from other influential leftist thinkers that I've read is how he focused so deeply on individual motives. We aren't conformists because we have no ideas of our own. We're too scared to express ourselves. We aren't racist because we are by nature hateful. Our sense of belonging is just too fragile to tolerate diversity. We aren't only greedy, blind consumers who work endlessly so that we can fill our house and 2 storage units with expensive stuff that we don't need. We're trying to feel like an independent, strong human, one who's caught in a society that lies to us about success. I love Fromm's approach because, at its heart, it is a compassionate analysis. It says we're not to blame for our humanity, nor are we to blame for the society that we're born into. But we do have a responsibility to understand, to develop within ourselves the capacity to do better. With these ideas lodged in my head and encouraged by Fromm's understanding, I've written this episode to share some of what Fromm inspired in me. I can't help but to begin to fit myself into the carefully constructed edifice of Fromm's psychological worldview. We all do this in one way or another. Either find warm and cozy homes built out of immediate recognition, or cold, barren wastelands of an opposing viewpoint. When we're confronted with a well-written and serious attempt at explaining our complex world, and I suspect many others, begin to compare these ideas against our own experiences. If we recognize them, and they seem to fit, we're convinced. Where they feel wrong, empty, or just plain baffling, then we start to build counterarguments in our head. This tendency can take me down a correct path or an incorrect one, but I'll admit much of what Fromm has to say feels like a warm and worn cardigan. The constant tension, the constant arguments with myself, more than anything revolve around camouflaging myself in conformity or rebelling with idiotic individuality. I spent a lot of my time in dull, pointless conformity, and that choice was driven by fear. At the same time, I have maintained a narcissistic, self-indulgent individuality that was based in cowardly rebellion. The type of rebelling that is characterized by ridiculous, self-defeating, self-reliant, self-destructive addiction, and simple, somewhat sad rejection of popular trends. Not enough rebelling to step completely out of the shadows of conformity, but enough to maintain a modicum of emotional stability, a brittle, easily provoked, but utterly necessary sense of self. An internal battle, a cold war, has waged continuously and painfully in my pinhead for the majority of my 53 years on this planet. It's always seemed to me a quirk of my psychology I could never escape nor explain. Fromm, then, has offered me a convenient, simple way of looking more objectively at my own neuroses. And I have to admit, I have a bad case, but a completely normal one that I have to describe as humanitis. My humanity, stunted at an early age, was caught between a child's desire to be safe, to be loved and connected, versus an adult man's desire to emerge into a full, sane, and more independent humanity. This desire to return to nature or to a mother, the desire to be connected, to be one with those around us, is a quintessential part of our being. We're animals long before we become so uppity and clever. We've survived our evolution to humanity by being amongst our own fellows and safely within our environmental niches. This unconscious, instinctual behavior has never left us. At the same time, to be a fully developed human is to embrace our individuality. We are different and unique in nature, being the only animal who, as far as we know, has the capacity for full sentience, the ability, through our intellect, to observe the world and understand it as something different from ourselves. We can only embrace our full humanity if we are able to achieve a creative and productive relationship with our world. We need to use our intellect to shape our world in creative and individual ways. Each of us needs to struggle and balance these competing but deeply rooted needs within ourselves. Fromm contends that far too many of us, never reaching full maturity, remain trapped in conformity, willingly trading away our individuality for safety. Knowingly, or driven by unconscious guilt, we suffer because our conformity keeps us from living up to the demands of our human individuality and bravely forging a creative and productive relationship with the world. I found myself waging my internal civil war without ever being able to be objective about it. Sometimes I was narcissistically rebelling or obsessively seeking self-satisfaction. This part of myself was a drunk. This part of myself was a corporate asshole. This part of myself gave me permission to value my immediate needs over those around me. Sometimes I was a little child, desperate to please, desperate to be accepted or to be praised. This part of me demanded that I wear clothing that was just nice enough to seem stylish, yet also boringly similar to most of my peers. This part of me demanded I avoid conflict, even when conflict was unquestionably the right way to deal with the situation. This part of me kept working in a job I didn't enjoy more than a decade after I realized my unhappiness. This part of me tried to hide in plain sight, right in the middle of my peers, yet I was desperately lonely and always wistfully wishing for someone to notice and praise me. Stepping into Fromm's analysis, I can see a nicely constructed structure of ideas that describes this experience. My childhood was unhappy and lonely, and I can confidently claim traumatic injury. Yet it wasn't an overtly abusive situation, simply a family ill-equipped for managing life's demands and managing a needy, sensitive child. My childhood wasn't exceptional, and my experience would be uncomfortably familiar for many other people. Out of this environment, I adapted. I chose to become intensely independent while appearing unthreateningly conformist, seeking my personal emotional satisfactions in secrecy while showing a responsible, hardworking, and acceptable face to the world. This is the perfect environment to grow yourself a nice set of addictions. I wanted to be safely accepted to the world I found myself in, but I also wanted to comfort myself away from the judging eyes of others. I presented myself as mostly a milquetoast, at least from Monday to Friday, and I went to excess on the weekends. Neither personality at all comfortable with the other. The responsible hard worker was ashamed of the drunk, and the drunk was bored to death with the responsible hard worker. These personalities, constantly at war, were both ultimately wanting the same thing: to be popular, to be sociable, to be safe, to be at ease, to be recognized, and to feel as if they were loved. Equally, I wanted to be strong enough to choose my own life, and I wanted to be proud of these choices. One persona wanted to believe that through self-sacrificing hard work, all of my internal distress could be solved by success, money, prestige, and respect. This character was conforming. The drunk, on the other hand, was all about immediate gratification. He was all about feeling free. He was all about feeling good, feeling comfortable, being part of the party. This character was seeking a good time, right now. And screw anyone who depended on me. This character was deeply narcissistic. Both of these characters were immature. Both were holding on to childhood behaviors rather than growing into the full maturity that demands a loving, encompassing relationship with others. I think Fromm describes this internal battle extremely well. Although, having lived the experience, I'm not sure that a simple escape from alienation and adult education, as Fromm recommends, would have been an effective cure in my case, when one is completely blind to the mature love that Fromm describes. Fromm's ideas explain my own experience and still apply to the level of the 21st century society. I can't say conclusively that my own immaturity, or in modern therapeutic language, my childhood trauma, has anything to do with our modern society necessarily. But modern society also doesn't offer much help. Many social critics have pointed out how the modern economy distorts traditional family structures and relations. Also, there are definitely neoliberal ideas being taught to children, and these messages support self-sacrificing, conformist behavior, or they conflate purely materialist consumption with success. Without these messages, I'm not sure I would have still become stuck. What I do believe is that I would have been more likely to seek help and treatment much earlier in my life if it were not for our insane society. My society believes that happiness is to be found in wealth, in popularity, in fame, in blind consumption, in pure materialism, and believes chasing that is acceptable, even if it means fuck the rest of the planet. These messages are pure propaganda, and they're all the more damaging because they're completely untrue. Our sick society encouraged me to revel in my own self-sacrificing and self-imposed suffering, encouraged me to conform in self-destructive ways. Our sick society also blames those with addictions. It ascribes their suffering to their own lack of willpower, to moral or ethical bankruptcy. This isn't some special prejudice applied to addicts, though. The same views are applied to the poor, to those whose particular neural wiring makes them poorly suited to the modern economy. The same moral judgments are applied to individuals who reject conformity. Because we've become so confused about what is morality and what is economics, we're willing to apply capitalist prejudices to purely human weaknesses. Those who can fit in the best, those who are naturally outgoing, those who can memorize and focus on endless boring details, the rule followers, the naturally self-controlled, these individuals are valorized and given huge advantages in our advanced capitalist states. Whereas those who aren't able, who don't want to play the conformity game, are at a dramatic disadvantage. This gets especially ugly when our society broadly accepts that these disadvantaged folks would be fine if they just decided to be better. If they just decided to use their willpower and do better. This is all, of course, the nonsense that is spouted by the mindless mainstream. Thinking over these ideas, I find my mind treading familiar paths. There's a lot of social criticism, of written argument, of YouTube commentary, and so on that will repeat all of these ideas. Fromm did bring new ideas into my consciousness, though. One of these ideas that has been bouncing around in my addled noodle for the past couple of weeks is Fromm's comments around boredom. That the modern human seems to be driven to constant activity punctuated by constant distraction. So we work long hours, constantly bombarded by email, phone calls, Zoom meetings, and useless bureaucratic form filling. But we also have some limited opportunity for free leisure time. And the second that we have this time, we almost immediately fill it up. We fill it up with TV sports, with trips to the bar, with mindless scrolling of social media, with vacuous superhero movies, with various hobbies, with all-inclusive gluttony on the high seas that's also known as going on a cruise. What very few of us do is actually withdraw from this super busyness. Few of us put down the screens and just spend some time in quiet, with friends, with family, or even in solitude. The big question is why? We know that in pre-technology days, the vast majority of human existence, we had much more free time. We also know that there wasn't the easy availability of multiple channels of entertainment. Even reading is a relatively modern invention. Human beings have spent far more years sitting quietly in small groups in the dark, chatting or singing amongst themselves than they have ever spent in being completely, constantly entertained. So to argue that our obsessive and compulsive need for constant entertainment is a natural part of our humanity is just difficult to believe. Our ancestors must have been successful quietly sitting with their thoughts, or we wouldn't have become the species that we are. Fromm's answer to this question is that we've lost the ability to tolerate quiet, and that we've lost our ability to accept and even enjoy a bit of boredom. This state has come about because we've exchanged our materially poor and spiritually fulfilling past for a materially rich and spiritually empty present. We've gone from being small groups of close-knit humans, the dominant species in our environment, and surviving through daily application of our intelligence, to being huge agglomerations of materially rich but faceless robots, marching to the demands of an inhuman economy, in an inhuman society where we are not dominant. We are not even able to conceive of ourselves as truly independent. To sit quietly like our ancestors did is to leave ourselves exposed to the inescapable conclusion that we are alienated from our own humanity. We've made amazing comfort and safety, but in exchange for a part of ourselves that would have allowed us to appreciate the same comfort and safety, we have become nothing more than objects. We're staring, quote, into the abyss of nothingness, close quote, existing and separate, but as powerless as the pets we keep. People have commented a lot about the Great Resignation of 2020 and 21. They talk about demographics. They talk about people learning how to survive without their mindless jobs. They talk about low wages. They talk about shitty working conditions. But perhaps one of the gifts that COVID pandemic gave to us is a little bit of free and quiet time. It allowed us an opportunity to be bored for perhaps the first time in our entire lives, to sit without distraction and actually reflect on the life we're living. Under these conditions, I think there were many of us, and I count myself as one of them, who said, I'm not happy in my life. My life doesn't feel anything like what I've been promised. My life feels empty. My life feels horribly, deadeningly, inescapably unsatisfying. I don't know how I want to live, but I know this isn't it. As a result, fuck it, I quit. Somehow being poor doesn't seem so scary once I compare it to an endless, meaningless future. For many of us, we became fully aware for the first time of just how alienated we actually are. It stopped being a theory and became reality. This has been a good outcome from an otherwise pretty shitty start to the 2020s. But Fromm also implies pretty strongly that the modern human is, when fully conforming to their society, insane. This isn't presented, and I don't think it was intended as hyperbole. I think Fromm actually means it in its full, horrifying potential. We have amongst ourselves a huge percentage of people who are utterly unreachable, who are deeply, dangerously out of touch with reality. Fromm, in the last chapter of his book, writes the following prescient sentence, quote, "But indeed the shadows are lengthening. The voices of insanity are becoming louder," close quote. He has put this sentence in among a passage that is encouraging all of us to drive our society to change. But I also read it as a message that says, if we fail to change, things are going to become worse. Some people, and maybe our society as a whole, is going to become much sicker, more insane, and more dangerous. Now, Fromm isn't a fortune teller, and this isn't, I think, a deliberate prediction. Nonetheless, it seems he's right. We are seeing a group of people, a global group of people, who are utterly out of touch with reality, numerous enough to present a real danger to our survival. These people are, of course, the conspiranoids, the anti-mask, anti-lockdown, pro-reactionary, pro-demagogue, pro-capitalist, pro-radical religion, pro-family values, pro-hustle culture, and pro-extreme individualists who have become increasingly loud and influential in our world during the past 2 decades. Obviously, not all these people are the same. They are a big bag of mixed nuts, if you will. Yet they all have a few things in common. First of all, they tend to believe that there was a time, maybe 30, 40, or 50 years ago, when things were better. They all tend to believe that somehow some liberal, some elitist, some intellectual, or some Jewish cabal is bent on changing their world into something that is oppressing them. They tend to have extremely pro-capitalist beliefs, and far too often have racist, sexist, homophobic, or at least nationalistic beliefs. They all, pretty much without exception, seem to be immune to facts, to rational arguments, and reluctant in civilized debate. They are too busy rejecting any point of view that causes them cognitive dissonance to really listen to what others are saying. If these aren't the voices of insanity that Fromm was referencing, then I don't know who is. So what does Fromm warn us about these people? First, he warns us that these people are deeply anxious, and in that state, they're at risk of following a demagogue. Indeed, these demagogues are popping up, it seems, with frightening regularity. Trump, Fox News, and assorted Republican bobbleheads immediately spring to mind. But this is hardly an isolated or American problem. We've seen the rise of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, President Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte in the Philippines, the Brexit campaigners, and Morris in Australia. In each of these men, although it isn't necessarily the purview of only men, share a tendency to hide in simplicity, callousness, emotion over intellect, and fragile weakness all dressed up as strength. Each of these men, sadly, does not exist without substantial support. Now, I've left off our good friend V. Putin because he's been around well before the rest. But other than timing, I think he exemplifies their qualities to an exponential degree. Fromm also points out how the sadly insane are mindlessly conformist. It is likely exactly this conformity that makes them so reactionary. Anti-LGBT, anti-immigration, pro-traditional religion, pro-capitalist, pro-individualist. Each of these beliefs is grounded in a fear of change. Changes reject the group norms that each of these people has spent their lives hiding behind. Traditional morality, traditional gender norms, traditional economic systems, traditional ethnic and racial majorities, traditional languages, and so on. A changing world is deeply dangerous to these people because they are terrified conformists. They are, by and large, also deeply nationalistic. Again, Fromm warned us. He wrote entire sections in his book explaining that these people, these deeply disturbed people, will connect pathologically to blood and soil. What scares me about these trends and these legions of disturbed people isn't their traditional conservative values or their fear of change. What really frightens me about them is their immunity to rationality. That they will believe any narrative, no matter how simplistic and sometimes ridiculous, no matter how potentially outrageous, and utterly untouched by a single fact because these narratives support their preconceived beliefs. Each belief protects them from a need to grow out of their safe conformity. Each of these beliefs, once embedded among even a minority of these socially created schizophrenics, quickly spreads and is picked up by the rest of the group. And of course it is, because these people are, above all, neurotically conformist. So if Joe Bob or Nigel or Jesus or Alejandro or Ali believes this wild conspiracy, then of course they feel that they have to believe it too. Otherwise, they might find themselves alone amongst their peers. This group of people to whom they attach all of their psychological safety. To do anything other than to adopt these beliefs is to throw themselves to the wolves. This is a group, more than any other, that might pick up guns and start killing without so much as a discussion, because they're simply incapable of resisting the group mood once it shifts to homicide. Now, I don't think that mass violence is an inevitability, and I don't believe that the cause is only modern alienation. Obviously, social media, economic conditions, and other factors also play a role. But I think Fromm's theory does provide an interesting insight into the movement. What I found personally frightening about this trend is the complete inability of these groups to change absolutely anything for the better. The same groups who are most deranged by the conditions of modern society are the same groups most ready to fight for the system, for historic socioeconomic foundations that built the mess we live in. These are the people who believe that the only cure for poisoning is to drink more poison. They will attempt to trap the rest of us, those of us who want a better world, in exactly the world we detest. They will be ready to ignore global warming. They will be ready to ignore expert advice. They will ignore a growing body of evidence. They will ignore dangerous trends that lead inevitably to war, to oppression, and to ever more exclusion of the disenfranchised. Just as the war in Ukraine seemed horribly inevitable in these past few months, so does the ultimate direction of these tendencies. The insane cannot be trusted to lead us. While we may be laughing at their deluded ideas, let us not make the mistake of ignoring or mistreating them. We can't afford to. So where does that leave me with my own internal civil war? I mean, I've managed to escape some of the worst extremes of my behavior. I'm no longer chasing material success and no longer drinking myself into unconsciousness. But at best, all I can claim is that I'm fully aware of my problem, not that I'm free of it. To move forward, I think Fromm also offers a solution. The way forward, the way to balance my internal nature, is to learn how to love. Love means recognizing that I'm flawed and that I need to feel connected, to feel the support of others. But not in a transactional love that is found outside, by finding some perfect relationship with some perfect person, some perfect system, some perfect leader. Instead, I need to develop my own capacity for true love. A love that accepts what it finds in reality. A love that accepts, just as I'm flawed, so are those people who disagree with me. Deep down, we all want the same thing, even the nuts. We all want to feel safe. We all want to belong. We all want to be free to develop our independent characters and at the same time feel safe. We can only balance within ourselves and only balance our society through being willing to accept and listen to others. We can only succeed by offering everyone a seat at the table and an opportunity to join in the decision making. The way forward is to establish the areas we can all agree as the basis for any decision. If we want to embrace our own sanity, then that sanity depends on our ability to love. A love that demands that we engage with others, regardless of how painful and regardless of the criticism that we will inevitably get. We need to see that they are us and that we are them. We can't expect anyone else to end this battle for us if we refuse to go first. This is a tall order, but our future depends on it. I want to thank the channel Philosophize This for the excellent video on Fromm's ideas about love, and we'll link that video in the description. As always, my script is available also as a link in the description. Finally, and again in the description, is all my contact information if you would like to send me a message. If you enjoyed my navel gazing, then I would certainly appreciate a like and subscribe. This is XCG, wishing you all a lovely, kind, and accepting journey down your road to freedom.